Right, happy Sabbath, everybody. Good to be back and studying and finishing up the story of Nehemiah and the restoration of the temple, of how it was restored during the time of Zerubbabel, right? The time of Ezra, and now the time of Nehemiah. So we basically have gone through the whole story, right? I thought it was just going to take a couple of lessons just to go through Nehemiah, but I think that I just had to do the whole chapter of Nehemiah. So eventually we're just finishing up the last couple of chapters of Nehemiah, because it is a part of the restoration of the sanctuary, right? And where I want to go is the final part of the restoration of the sanctuary during the time of Nehemiah. Because remember, when he first came, he noticed that all the walls and the gates were all destroyed. So he had to restore the walls and the gates. So, and then what happened? He actually returned to Shushan, right? But then there was an issue, because people, when Nehemiah was no longer there, Ezra is so old, and he may have died. But anyway, he no longer, the restoration, the principles have been left behind. So there still has to be restoration that is continued. And this is what we're going to do, is because Nehemiah had to come back and do a final reformation, right? He already started the reformation when he built the walls and rebuilt the gates. But now he has to do the final reformation to restore the city, the temple, the services, and this is what we're going to study and finish up today, all right? Okay, so this will be the last portion of about Nehemiah, and we'll end with the enemies of the restoration of the temple and how it applies to our end time. Okay, so Nehemiah 13, right? Before this, okay, Eliashib, the priest, having the oversight of the chamber of the house of our God, was allied unto Tobiah. Who's Tobiah? He's an Ammonite, right? And how many generations have to pass before an Ammonite can join with the Jews? The Moabite and the Ammonite has 10 generations. Wow. Now here, he's already staying in the temple. And he had prepared for him a great chamber, where aforetime they laid the meat offering. Right? The frankincense, the vessels, and the tithes of the corn, the new wine, and the oil, which was commanded to be given to the Levites and the singers and the porters, right? Because the singers and the porters are, what tribe do they belong to? They're also the Levites, right? So they have to be paid, because they have to sing, and they have to keep bringing in, people will give offerings. They're the ones that keep all these things in order. They're kind of like the officers, right? They guard the gates of the temple also. All these, they have to be paid, because they work basically 24/7. 7 days a week they work, right? And the offerings for the priest. But in all this time was not I at Jerusalem. See, he was not in Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year, in the 32nd year of our king of Babylon, came I unto the king. So he went back to the king of Babylon. He went back to Artaxerxes. Well, Artaxerxes is not king of Babylon. He's king of Middle Persia. But I guess he rules Babylon also, right? Yeah. So he rules the world, right? Yeah. What year was it that Nehemiah first came? Okay, if you remember, what year was it? What year was it? Ezra came on the 7th year of Artaxerxes, Ezra, right? What year did Nehemiah came? To the 20th year. So if he went back on the 32nd year, it means that he stayed there for 12 years and then he went back, right? And after certain days, obtain a leave of the king. So now he can go back to Jerusalem again. And I came to Jerusalem and understood of the evil that Eliashib did for Tobiah in preparing him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. Wow. Because why? He's an Ammonite. He's the leader of the enemies, right? And now Eliashib gives him a what? A place in the temple, and that place used to be the place of all these offerings, the tithes and offerings, right? And it grieved me sore. Therefore I cast forth all the household stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber. Then I commanded, and they cleansed the chamber, and thither brought I again the vessels of the house of God, with the meat offering and the frankincense, right? Yeah. So he had to come again, and what had to do? He had to cleanse the temple, right? Yeah. Doesn't it sound like Jesus? Right? He had to rebel, and then he had to cleanse it. He had to cleanse the temple how many times? 2 times. Here, Nehemiah had to come back, right? He had the city was rebuilt, but he had to come back and do another reformation. He had to do the reformation twice, right? Nehemiah had to do 2 reformations. Jesus had to cleanse the temple twice, right? Solemnly and publicly, the people of Judah had pledged themselves to obey the law of God. But when the influence of Ezra and Nehemiah was for a time withdrawn, there were many who departed from the Lord. Nehemiah had returned to Persia. During his absence from Jerusalem, evils crept in that threatened to pervert the nation. Idolaters not only gained a foothold in the city, but contaminated by their presence the very precincts of the temple. Wow. Through intermarriage, a friendship had been brought about between Eliashib the high priest and Tobiah the Ammonite, Israel's bitter enemy. Through intermarriage, right? Because Tobiah became the son-in-law. I can't believe it. Yeah, it's right. It's through intermarriage. As a result of this unhallowed alliance. Right, yeah. It's a unholy alliance, right? He's a high priest. Can you imagine? He's the one that rebuilt the sheep gate. He was part of rebuilding the sheep gate, and he let this thing happen. As a result of the unhallowed alliance, Eliashib had permitted Tobiah to occupy an apartment connected with the temple, which hitherto had been used as a storeroom for tithes and offerings of the people. Wow, this is amazing, right? Because why? And this is what is so disturbing. Because of the cruelty and treachery of the Ammonites and Moabites towards Israel, God had declared through Moses they should be forever shut out from the congregation of his people. Remember that? For 10 generations, that's basically forever, And 10 generations is a long time. In defiance of this word, the high priest had cast out the offerings stored in the chamber of God's house to make a place for this representative of a proscribed race. Greater contempt for God could not have been shown than to confer such a favor on this enemy of God and his truth. Wow. This was an unholy alliance, an unlawful marriage, because they have now become family, right? Now he's doing favors for Tobiah, right? And Tobiah is actually defiling the temple, right? And he actually could not have joined for 10 generations. Wow.
Kasi imagine the temple must be beautiful. So I have to be there. I have to live there.
Yeah. Right. And when we read Nehemiah 11, verse 1 and 2, the people that were to live in Jerusalem, because they had to live all over Judah and Benjamin, right? That area. They had a place to stay, actually. They had their own land that they actually couldn't go back to. But those who lived in Jerusalem they had to give up living there in their own land and had to live in Jerusalem, right? So this is how they chose. And the rulers of the people dwelt at Jerusalem. The rest of the people also cast lots to bring 1 of 10 to dwell in Jerusalem, the holy city, and 9 parts to dwell in other cities. And the people blessed all the men that willingly offered themselves to dwell at Jerusalem. Right? It's like a tithe. 1 out of 10. What? Yeah, they willingly offered to live in Jerusalem, to stay in Jerusalem, right? All right, so we continue with Nehemiah here. And I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given them. For the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled everyone to his field. So what happens? Those who were supposed to live in Jerusalem and work, what happened to them? They went back to the field because they're not being paid, right? Yeah, all the places for their offerings and their tithes have now been thrown out and now used for an Ammonite to stay. Then contended I with the rulers and said, Why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Then brought all Judah the tithe of the corn and new wine and oil unto the treasuries. And I made treasures over the treasuries. Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, and the Levites. Pedaiah, and next to him was Hanan the son of Zaccur, the son of Mattaniah, for they were counted faithful, and their office was to distribute unto their brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and wipe not out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for the offices thereof. So part of the Reformation is restoring the tithing system for the workers who had to work, right? And that's part of the final Reformation here. Okay, right. Right. Not only had the temple been profaned, but the offerings had been misapplied. This had tended to discourage the liberalities of the people. They lost their zeal and fervor, and were reluctant to pay their tithes. The treasures of the Lord's house was poorly supplied. Many of the singers and others employed in the temple service, not receiving sufficient support, had left the work of God to labor elsewhere. Nehemiah set to work to correct these abuses. He gathered together those who had left the service of the Lord's house and set them in their place. This inspired the people with confidence, and all Judah brought the tithe of the corn and the new wine and the oil. Men who were counted faithful were made treasurers of the treasuries, and their office was to distribute unto the brethren. All right. So the tithing system had to be restored because as part of the final Reformation. Right? And we continue now. What else had to be restored? In those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath, bringing in sheaves and lading asses, as also wine, grapes, figs, and all manner of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals. There dwelt men of Tyre, right? These were the heathens, which brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah, and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said unto them, What evil thing is this that ye do, and profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers thus, and did not our God bring all this evil upon us and upon this city? Yet ye bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath? Right? Did not we have to go to Babylon for 7 times because we did not let the land keep its Sabbaths, and now you're profaning the Sabbath. Don't you understand what actually is the reason why we actually had to go to heathen land because of not keeping the Sabbath, right? And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and charged that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gates, that there should no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day, right? Okay. So there had to be also a what? A Sabbath reformation, right? Oh, I keep doing this. All right. Another result of intercourse with idolaters was a disregard of the Sabbath. The sign distinguishing the Israelites from all other nations as worshippers of the true God. Nehemiah found that heathen merchants and traders from the surrounding country coming to Jerusalem has induced many among the Israelites to engage in traffic on the Sabbath. There were some who could not be persuaded to sacrifice principle, but others transgressed and joined with the heathen in their efforts to overcome the scruples of the more conscientious. Many dared openly to violate the Sabbath. Wow. Really amazing. Just kind of reminded me of what we saw, when you go to Jerusalem and you walk around on Sabbath day. Everything is closed, except for the Muslims who have their shops still open. So everything is closed. Oh, everything is closed, except for the shops of the Muslims. They're still open, right? This state of things might have been prevented had the rulers exercised their authority, but the desire to advance their own interests had led them to favor the ungodly. Nehemiah fiercely rebuked them in their neglect of duty. He then gave command that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, they should be shut and not open again till the Sabbath was past. And having more confidence in his own servants than in those that the magistrates of Jerusalem might appoint. Right? He did not believe in the leaders, right? Because the leaders were the ones that instigated this. They're the ones that did not keep the Sabbath. Right? He stationed them, his own servants, at the gates to see that his orders were enforced. Right? So the merchants and the sellers of all kind ware lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. Then I testified against them and said unto them, Why lodge ye about the wall? If ye do so again, I will lay hands on you. Oh, wow! I will lay hands on you. You know what? I will do you harm. From that time forth came they no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should come and keep the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of thy mercy. Not inclined to abandon their purpose. So basically what I did was I'm just reading prophets and kings, right? About until the end here, right? This chapter about Nehemiah, the end part of the chapter. Not inclining to abandon their purpose. The merchants and the sellers of all kinds were lodged without Jerusalem once or twice, hoping to find opportunity for traffic with either the citizens or the country people. Nehemiah warned them that they would be punished if they continued this practice. He also directed the Levites to guard the gates, knowing that they would command greater respect than the common people. While from their close connection with the service of God, it was reasonable to expect that they would be more zealous in enforcing obedience to His law. Right? So this was, the Reformation had to be done, and they actually had to, forbid the heathens from selling on Sabbath, right, near Jerusalem. Okay. All right. So what we see here, what was the principle, right? Yeah, it had to be a perpetual covenant. The Sabbath was a perpetual covenant, and we find this in Exodus 31. Ye shall keep the Sabbath thereof, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defileth it should be surely put to death. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath day of rest, holy to the Lord. Whosoever does any work on the Sabbath day, he shall be surely put to death. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations. A perpetual covenant, because it is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Right? So it is a perpetual covenant, and this had to be restored. Right? This had to be restored. Right? And when was it that this covenant was eventually pronounced? The perpetual covenant, which is the everlasting gospel, the everlasting covenant, was pronounced, and it was repeated by the Father directly from heaven. Right? And the Father repeated it, and what did he do? He blessed also the people who kept the Sabbath. Right? And when was this? When he announced when Jesus is going to come. Right? Yeah. It's a perpetual covenant. Those who keep the Sabbath and keep this covenant will be blessed. Yeah? And then they will be able to hear the day and the hour of Jesus coming. And this is from early writings 34. And as God spoke the day and the hour of Jesus coming and delivered this everlasting covenant. So God the Father, he delivered the everlasting covenant. At that time, when people are looking up to heaven, they can hear the everlasting covenant being repeated by the Father. Right? He spoke one sentence and then paused, while the words were rolling through the earth. The Israel of God stood with their eyes fixed upward, listening to the words as they came from the mouth of Jehovah and rolled through the earth like peals of loudest thunder. It was awfully solemn. And when the never-ending blessing was pronounced on those who had honored God and keeping his Sabbath holy. So he also gave a blessing upon those who had continued to keep the Sabbath day. Because at this time, those who would listen to it are the what? Are those who actually had passed through the Sunday law, right? Yeah, they have gone through the Sunday law. They've gone through the six plagues, right? And then now they can hear it. And God gives them a blessing because they have passed through Sunday law and continued, even at the threat of death, that they kept the Sabbath. There was a mighty shout of victory over the beast, over his image. Then commenced the Jubilee. So that's when the Jubilee started, right? Because this is when the land should rest. Remember, Nehemiah says, don't you remember why we went to Babylon? It's because you did not let the land rest. He says, what are you doing again? You're breaking the Sabbath, right? It's the same thing, right? So he's giving, the Father is also giving a blessing to those who keep the Sabbath. And and he also pronounced right? He's delivering the everlasting covenant, and now begins the Jubilee. The 7th millennium, right? 7th millennium starts. Okay. Oops, I keep doing this. Right. All right, Jeremiah 17, 19 to 22. What is it? This is talking about the burdens, right? Can you carry burdens on the Sabbath? Thus said the Lord of God unto me, go and stand in the gate of the children of the people, whereby the kings of Judah came in, and by the which they go out, and in all the gates of Jerusalem. And say unto them, hear ye the word of the Lord, ye kings of Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem that enter by these gates. Thus saith the Lord, take heed to yourself, and bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem. Neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day. Neither do ye any work, but hallow ye the Sabbath day, as I commanded your fathers. All right? All right, what's the next thing that he had to do? And this is the last Reformation. All right, this last Reformation. So the Reformation was in the tithing system and on the Sabbath. And then this is the last part, the last point. In those days also I saw Jews that had married wives of Ashdod, of Ammon, and of Moab. Wow. And these are even the leaders, remember? The leaders let their children and let their grandchildren marry heathens, right? And their children spake half in the speech of Ashdod and could not speak in the Jews' language. Why is that important? Because they can't read the Bible. I mean, they're right? They can't read the Word of God, right? They don't even understand the Jews' language. But according to the language of each people. And I contended with them and cursed them. Wow. And smote certain of them and plucked off their hair and made them swear by God, saying, Ye shall not give your daughters unto their sons, nor take their daughters unto your sons, or for yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Solomon had been blessed by God. He was the wisest. Instead, what happened? He fell because of the same thing. Yet among many nations was there no king like him. He was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, even him did outlandish women cause to sin. Shall we then hearken unto you to do all this great evil, to transgress against our God in marrying strange wives? And one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Eliashib, remember Eliashib? He's the one that what? He's the high priest. Was the son-in-law to Sanballat the Horonite. Wow. Oh, Sanballat. I got it confused. It's actually not Tobiah was the one. It's actually Eliashib that gave his son to marry the daughter of Sanballat. Therefore I chased him from me. Wow. Right? Remember them, oh my God, because they have defiled the priesthood. These are priests. Remember, the sons have become priests, right? The sons of the high priest, right? They're supposed to be priests. They have defiled the priesthood because they have married strange wives. And the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. Thus cleansed I them from all strangers, and appointed the wards of the priest and the Levite, everyone in his business. And for the wood offering at times appointed, and for the first fruits, remember me, O my God, for good. Wow. Yeah. So this is what they had to do. This is the second part of the Reformation, right? The second part of the Reformation is that at the end they had to divorce their strange wives. Remember, didn't this happen before? When did they have to divorce their strange wives? Remember, it was during the Reformation of the time of what? Ezra, right? They had to divorce their strange wives also. Here, they had to do it also. Okay. And now Nehemiah turned his attention to the danger that again threatened Israel from intermarriage and association with idolaters. So there's the problem of what? Sabbath and marriage. Oh, what's Sabbath and marriage? The twin institutions, right? It had to be restored. The twin institution had to be restored, right? So now we know where this is. We know this is in the end time what it has to be restored, right? These unlawful alliances were causing great confusion in Israel, for some who entered into them were men in high position, rulers to whom people had a right to look for counsel and a safe example. Foreseeing the ruin before the nation if this evil were allowed to continue, Nehemiah reasoned earnestly with the wrongdoers. Pointing to the case of Solomon, he reminded them that among all the nations there had risen no king like this man, to whom God had given great wisdom, yet idolatrous women had turned his heart from God. An example had corrupted Israel. Right? There were some in sacred office who had pleaded for their heathen wives. declaring that they could not bring themselves to separate from them. But no distinction was made, no respect was shown for rank or position. Whoever among the priests or rulers refused to sever his connection with idolaters were immediately separated from the service of the Lord. Wow. That's why they sent him away. A grandson of the high priest, having married a daughter of the notorious Sanballat, was not only removed from office, but promptly banished from Israel. Wow. Man, this is how severe it was, right? This had to be done because otherwise it will continue to contaminate the people. Right? Many who had married idolaters chose to go with them into exile. Wow. With those who had been expelled from the congregations, joined the Samaritans. Who are the Samaritans? It's a mixture of those who were left behind and the heathens, right? These are the mixed people, right? Now these people who now they belong to Judah, now they join with the Samaritans. Hither some who had occupied high positions in the work of God found their way, and after a time cast in their full lot with them. Desiring to strengthen this alliance, the Samaritans promised to adopt more fully the Jewish faith and customs. And the apostates, determined to outdo their former brethren, erected a temple on Mount Gerizim, in opposition to the house of God at Jerusalem. Their religion continued to be a mixture of Judaism and heathenism. It's a false marriage, right? And their claim to be people of God was the source of schism, emulation, and enmity between the two nations from generation to generation. This is how the Samaritans, right, had their religion. They wanted to compete with the Jews, right? And they made their own temple at Mount Gerizim. Oops, sorry about that. In the work of reform to be carried forward today, there is need of men who, like Ezra and Nehemiah, will not palliate or excuse sin, nor shrink from vindicating the honor of God. Those upon whom rests the burden of this work will not hold their peace when wrong is done, neither will they cover evil with a cloak of false charity. They will remember that God is no respecter of persons, and that severity to a few may prove mercy to many. Oh, I like that. Severity to a few may prove mercy to many.
So it's an example.
Right. Yeah. This is why it had to be done at that time, because otherwise it will cause a lot of ruin, right, to many. They will remember also that in the one who rebukes evil, the Spirit of Christ should ever be revealed. Yeah, because Jesus also rebuked evil. In their work, Ezra and Nehemiah humbled themselves before God, confessing their sins and sins of their people. Wow, they, just like who? Daniel, right? Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, they all confessed their sins and the sins of their people, entreating pardon as if they themselves were the offenders. Patiently they toiled and prayed and suffered. That which made their work most difficult was not what made it difficult? It was not the open hostility of the heathen. What was more difficult? But the secret opposition of who? Pretended friends, who by lending their influence to the service of evil, increased tenfold the burdens of God's servants. And it's more difficult when you're dealing with the evil that is within than the evil without. It's here, Ellen White said, it's tenfold more difficult. Mm-hmm. These traitors furnish the Lord's enemy with material to use in their warfare upon his people. Oh, they're going to tell you, you know what, they're building this wall, they're building this, and they're going to tell you, they're going to tell the enemies the position of God's people. Their evil passions and rebellious wills were ever at war with the plain requirements of God, right? So we see there's the enemies of the work of Nehemiah, right? So at the towards the end here, what we're going to do is just we're going to summarize, the enemies of the Reformation, right? Okay. Well, here are the enemies of Nehemiah. Now, who are the foremost in the enemies? Sanballat, right? Sanballat, Tobiah, and Gershon. All right. So we added here, Sanballat he's the Persian satrap of Samaria. The satrap is what? He's a leader, right? He's a leader appointed by Persia, the Horonite, which is a place in Moab. So he's a Moabite, right? The incestuous son of Lot. What happened? He became in-laws with Joiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest. He intermarried, right? It's a symbol of incestuous relationship, right? Yeah. This is a symbol of false marriage, right? Because he also became in-laws with Joiada, the son of Eliashib, right? And Tobiah is an Ammonite. He's an inbred son of Lot, right? He's also the son-in-law of Shechaniah, and in-laws with Meshullam, the builder of the east gate and also the fish gate, right? And this is also an incestuous son of Lot also, the Ammonite. And then Geshem or Gashmu is the Arabian, right? Is the Arabian. Okay, who else of the heathens, right? The Ashdodites, right? These are the Philistines, right? The Ashdodites are the Philistines. Okay, what about the Jews who were the enemies of Nehemiah? Right? Oops, let me go back. It's the nobles of the Tekoites, right? Here are the leaders of the Tekoites. They were supposed to rebuild the fish gate, right? The Tekoites, they rebuilt the fish gate, but the leaders did not, right? And there's also a person named Judah. He's the one that sent letters to Tobiah to tell Tobiah, hey, this is what's going on. He's the one that betrayed them. This is really 10 times more problematic, right? And the Jews who dwelt by, those who were not working to rebuild, they exaggerate this. This cannot be done, you got a problem here. This will never, they keep saying, this will never be finished. They exaggerate the difficulties, right? And Shemaiah, who was hired by Sanballat and Tobiah to lure Nehemiah to the temple and say, you know what, you're going to be killed. You better run to the temple, right? And stop working because you're going to be killed. As a matter of fact, wait a minute. I'm not going to be killed. God is with this endeavor, I will not, listen to you, right? And the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets, what? False prophecy. Wow. There's going to be people who are going to give false prophecies in the end time. There's going to be the leaders and all these people who are going to, is going to hinder the work. And Eliashib, the high priest, he corrupted the sanctuary, the tithing system, and let Tobiah stay in the sanctuary, and let his grandson marry the daughter of Sanballat. Wow. Okay. The work of restoration and reform carried on by the returned exiles under the leadership of Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah presents a picture of work or spiritual restoration that is to be wrought in the closing days of this earth's history. So we need to understand the work of Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, because they were working also under the decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, right? Yeah. And this represents the spiritual restoration that's happening in the end time, right? The remnant of Israel were a feeble people, exposed to the ravages of their enemies. But through them, God purposed to preserve the earth and knowledge of Himself and of His law. They were the guardians of the true worship, the keepers of the holy oracles, right? The true worship and the holy oracles, right? This is the laws that was preserved. Varied were the experiences that came to them as they rebuilt the temple and the wall of Jerusalem. Strong was the opposition that they had to meet. Heavy were the burdens borne by the leaders in this work. But these men moved forward in the one unwavering confidence, in humility of spirit, and in firm reliance upon God, believing that He would cause His truth to triumph. Like King Hezekiah, Nehemiah clave to the Lord and departed not from following Him, but kept His commandment, and the Lord was with him. So we saw there were many enemies of Nehemiah, right? From the heathens, but also a lot from the Israelites, right? From the people of Judah, right? And it included even the high priest and the family of the high priest, right? Yeah. Okay, what about during the time of Ezra? Who were the enemies at the time of Ezra? Okay, I had to think about this. I had to go back on my notes and see who were the enemies in the time of Ezra. Can you think of any of the enemies? The only one that I can think of is, who did they have to divorce? Their strange wives also, right? In the time of Ezra, they had to divorce their strange wives. Remember that? Okay, I couldn't find any other enemies. Maybe we'll find some more enemies, but I couldn't find any more enemies, right? But what about during the time of Zerubbabel? Okay, this one I'm going to ask you if you remember. Who's the enemy? Now, Zerubbabel, he's going to rebuild the temple, right? And when he was rebuilding the temple, who was the first one that complained about the temple being rebuilt? And they said, oh, it doesn't look as good as what it used to be. The ancient men, right? Yeah. The elders, right? Yeah. The enemies of Zerubbabel, right? The ancient men who had seen the first house. And what did they do? They said, no, this can never rival. This is not good. This is not good. This is not good as Solomon's temple, right? Yeah. Who else? The Samaritans, who said they wanted to help build the tabernacle. They said, oh, we can help you. And then it says, what did Zerubbabel say? No, you cannot have anything to do. It is our job, right? You are not allowed to rebuild the temple. Right? Who else? False Smyrnis, right? Who's false Smyrnis? Yeah, he issued a decree to halt the rebuilding of the temple and the city, right? Yeah. Who else? The enemies of Zerubbabel. Bishlam, Mithredath, and Tabil, and the rest of their companions, accusing the builders of what? Sedition, not paying toll, tribute, and custom to the crown, right? They're being accused of sedition. Also, what happened to Nehemiah? They were also accused of sedition also. They wanted to elect Nehemiah as a king, right? And so that they wanted to come out of under the rule of Medo-Persia, right? Yeah, it was sedition also. They were accused of sedition, right? Okay. So when we know this, we can see that the enemies of the restoration comes from outside and from inside. But it's even worse from inside, because people will have a false sense of security, right? And they don't understand. They think that this, and it's even worse because it's the leaders from inside that's going to hinder the work of the restoration. And this work will be the work in our end time. So for us, we're going to have to deal with, the people who are going to go against the doctrine of the sanctuary in our end time. Because we are to restore the sanctuary doctrine, right? This is what we have to do. But there's going to be people, right? And it's going to be coming from outside and inside. So this is what we are eventually, transitioning to. I'm going to go over the the rebuttals of our sanctuary doctrine and how it is being attacked, right, in the end time, right? The spiritual restoration of which the work carried forward in Nehemiah's days was a symbol. It's outlined in the words of Isaiah. They shall build the old waste places. They shall raise up the former desolations, and they shall repair the waste cities. They shall be of thee, shall build the old waste places, and they shall raise up the foundations of many nations, and they shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. So when we are restoring the sanctuary doctrine, we are to repair the old waste places, right? Those that have been built by our pioneers, right? We have to rebuild it again, right? Because they have been forgotten and they have been destroyed. The prophet here describes a people who, in a time of general departure from truth and righteousness, are seeking to restore the principles that are the foundation of the kingdom of God. They are repairers of a breach that had been made in God's law, the wall that has placed around His chosen ones for their protection, and obedience to whose precepts of justice, truth, and purity is to be their perpetual safeguard. What does the wall represent? What does the walls of Jerusalem? The law of God. Is that because the law of God is your protection, right? It's there to protect you, but you broke it down. You're not rebuilding it. It's been broken down. It's not being rebuilt. So the law of God has to be vindicated and be defended. Oops. In words of unmistakable meaning, the prophet points out the specific work of this remnant people who built the wall. If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord, honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words, then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, and will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. That's Isaiah 58. Right? This is the specific word of the people who had to rebuild the wall. They had to restore the Sabbath, right? And they had to restore the Sabbath is symbolized by the fourth commandment, which is written by God's hand on the tables of stone, which is found in the altar in the most holy place, in the sanctuary, right? So the sanctuary, the Sabbath, right, have to be restored. And in the time of the end, every divine institution is to be restored, right? And the divine institutions that are be restored is what again? Marriage and Sabbath. Remember, you know what? They had unlawful marriage, right? They had the tithing system of the sanctuary was being corrupted. You know, the sanctuary is a symbol of a marriage, right? Because the sanctuary represents the work of Jesus to reunite his people to himself, to unite the bride with the bridegroom, to make an atonement, to make one month, right? To make it's like a marriage, right? So the sanctuary represents a marriage also, right? So that when you see that the tithing system, that's part of the sanctuary, right? The marriage, right? That's part of that's symbolized also in the sanctuary, and also the Sabbath, right? These institutions have to be restored. The breach made in the law of the time the Sabbath was charged by men is to be repaired, or changed by men is to be repaired. God's remnant people standing before the world as reformers are to show that the law of God is the foundation of all enduring reform. And the Sabbath of the fourth commandment is to stand as a memorial of creation, a constant reminder of the power of God. In clear, distinct lines, they are to present the necessity of obedience of all the precepts of the Decalogue. Constrained by the love of Christ, they are to cooperate with Him in building up the waste places. They are to be repairers of the breach, restorers of the past to dwell in. Right? Okay. Because as we know, right, the sanctuary illustrates God's plan to reunite His people back to Him. Right? The bride is to be reunited with the bridegroom, right? To be made one, to make an atonement, right? And in the sanctuary, what do we see? The health reform, the Sabbath reform, righteousness by faith, the truth about the Father, the truth about the personality of the Father and the Son, right? All these things are the foundation and the pillars, right? The Sabbath is one of the pillars, right? And the preaching of the three angels' messages that was given by the Millerites based on the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation led to the understanding of the sanctuary, right? So they were studying the three angels' messages. They were proclaiming three angels' messages. And that led to the sanctuary message, right? So the three angels' messages is the foundation of which the sanctuary message is sits on, right? And that is why we know that the three decrees of the Medo-Persian kings led to the rebuilding of the temple, right? The 2300 days of Daniel 8:14, right? The beginning of it is what? The decrees of the three kings that lead to the restoration of the temple. And the end of the 2300 days, what happens? The three angels' messages lead to the cleansing of the sanctuary, right? This is why Daniel 8:14 is the verse that shows the foundation and the central pillar of our faith, right? The beginning starts, we see the beginning and we know where it ends, right? And then we know that if there's enemies in the beginning, there's going to be enemies at the end time, right? So we have to know what is the, what do you call that? Modus operandi. Yeah? What they did back then, it's going to happen again, right? So we will be ready, okay? All right. Okay. And that is a more sure word of prophecy.